Near the top of a steep rock tower called Fajada Butte in Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, 3 slabs of stone lean against the cliff face, standing on edge like pages of a book. Behind them, carved into the rock, is a spiral, turning around itself 9.5 times. For most of the day, the spiral sits in shadow behind the stones, and nothing happens. But at the height of summer, a little after 11, a thin blade of sunlight slips down between the slabs and falls across the carving, a bright dagger of light that lengthens until, for a few minutes, it runs straight down through the exact center of the spiral, splitting it in 2. It is not a trick of one lucky day. At the winter solstice, 2 blades of light frame the spiral on either side, and at the equinoxes, the light marks it again in a different way. Somebody carved that spiral and set those stones so that the sun itself would keep a calendar on the face of the rock. And for centuries, almost nobody knew it was there. So who built a clock out of shadow and stone near the top of a desert butte? And how much of what it seems to do did they truly intend? To follow that question honestly, we have to start with the canyon and with the people who raised it. Chaco Canyon is one of the most extraordinary places in all of ancient North America. Roughly 1,000 years ago, between about the year 850 and the year 1150, the ancestral Puebloan people of the Colorado Plateau made this remote, dry canyon the center of a world. They built enormous multi-story buildings of shaped sandstone, structures called great houses, some with hundreds of rooms. Largest buildings in what is now the United States until well into the 1800s. They cut wide roads that run for miles in nearly straight lines across the desert. They hauled timber for their roofs from mountain forests dozens of miles away. And again in the way they placed and oriented their great buildings, they show a deep and deliberate attention to the sky, to the rising and setting of the sun and moon at the turning points of the year. Chaco was a place of astronomy built into architecture, and the Sun Dagger on Fajada Butte is the most famous single piece of that sky knowledge, though it is far from the only one. The greatest of the great houses, a huge D-shaped building called Pueblo Bonito, once held hundreds of rooms rising several stories against the canyon wall, and a long straight wall runs through it almost exactly along the line between true north and south, while another key wall tracks the east to west line of the equinox sun. Elsewhere in the Chacoan world, buildings and windows are placed to catch the light of the solstice sunrise, and some great houses far out in the desert are linked to Chaco by those wide, arrow straight roads. Taken together, the canyon reads like a landscape laid out by people who had watched the sky for generations and wanted their most important buildings to sit in agreement with it. So a marked spiral on a butte, catching the solstice sun, is not a strange outlier at Chaco. It is exactly the kind of thing you would expect these particular builders to make. The remarkable thing is how it was found, or rather refound. For centuries after Chaco was left, the marking on Fajada Butte sat unnoticed, high on a butte that is hard and dangerous to climb. Then, in the year 1977, an artist named Anna Sofayer was volunteering to record rock art in the canyon, and she made her way up Fajada Butte to look at the petroglyphs near the top. She was there close to midday in the summer, and she watched a dagger of light come down between the leaning slabs and cut across the spiral carved on the rock behind them. She understood at once that she was looking at something more than decoration. Following that first observation, Sofayer went on to study the site in detail, and to found what became known as the Solstice Project to investigate it and the wider astronomy of Chaco. What makes her recognition so impressive is how easy the thing is to miss. The dagger appears only near midday, only for a few minutes, and only around the solstice at the top of a butte that takes a hard scramble to reach. Anyone standing there at the wrong hour or the wrong week would see nothing but 3 slabs and a carving in shadow. Sofer happened to be there at the right moment and crucially understood what she was seeing. Careful observation through the year then revealed the full pattern. The single dagger bisecting the spiral at the summer solstice. The pair of daggers bracketing it at the winter solstice. The markings at the equinoxes, including a second light that falls on a smaller spiral carved beside the first. To pin all of this down, the Solstice Project photographed and recorded the light at the key dates across the year, building a careful case that the slabs and the spirals worked together as a single instrument. 3 great slabs of rock and 2 carved spirals, arranged so that the light passing between the stones would track the year. And Sofayer and her colleagues argued that the site did something even more ambitious than mark the sun. They proposed that it also recorded the moon. The moon has a long, slow rhythm that is much harder to notice than the yearly march of the sun, a cycle of about 19 years over which the points where the moon rises and sets on the horizon swing out to their widest limits and back again. This is called the lunar standstill cycle, and tracking it requires patient watching across almost 2 decades. The Solstice Project argued that shadows cast by the edges of the slabs onto the large spiral at the moonrise of those extreme years marked the limits of that long lunar cycle as well, so that the same set of stones held both the year of the sun and the far longer rhythm of the moon. If that is right, then the people of Chaco were not just noting the solstices, which many cultures do, but tracking one of the subtlest cycles in the sky, one that takes a human being most of a lifetime to see repeat. So the physical facts are these: 3 stone slabs and 2 carved spirals near the top of Fajada Butte, arranged so that blades of sunlight mark the solstices and the equinoxes on the rock, discovered by Ancestral Puebloan in 1977, in a canyon whose whole architecture is soaked in attention to the sky. The solstice markings can be observed, photographed, and modeled, and they have been. But the moment a site starts to seem almost too clever, and starts marking not just the sun, but the moon, an honest documentary has to slow down and ask how much of this the builders truly designed. If you enjoy slow documentaries that take an astonishing claim and weigh it fairly rather than just selling it, consider subscribing, because it genuinely helps these longer videos reach the people who like them. Because the Sun Dagger sits right at the edge between clear intention and hopeful pattern, and telling the two apart is the whole challenge. Start with the strongest part, because it really is strong. The blade of light that bisects the spiral at the summer solstice is precise, striking, and very hard to dismiss as an accident. The spiral is carved exactly where the midday solstice dagger falls, and the fit between the light and the center of the carving is close enough that most researchers accept the summer solstice marking as intentional, a deliberate pairing of a carving with a specific event of the sun. That much is held up well. From there, the ground gets softer. The first question is about the slabs themselves. Were they deliberately quarried and set in place by the people of Chaco, angled just so, or did 3 large slabs happen to fall against the cliff naturally, after which someone noticed the light they let through and carved the spiral to match? The honest answer is that we are not sure. Faint marks on the stone that might be evidence of shaping are, in places, effectively impossible to tell apart from the natural weathering of sandstone. So the site might be a fully engineered instrument, or it might be a natural accident of fallen rock that a brilliant observer recognized and completed with a carving. Those are very different stories, and the evidence does not cleanly decide between them. The second and larger question is about the moon. The summer solstice dagger is one clear event. The claim that the same stones also track the roughly 19-year lunar standstill cycle rests on shadows and alignments that are far more complex and far more open to interpretation, and a number of specialists regard the lunar claims as unproven, the kind of pattern that a determined observer can find in a rich jumble of light, shadow, and rock, whether or not it was ever intended. It is not that the lunar idea is impossible. It is that it is much harder to be sure of than the solstice dagger, and good archaeoastronomy has learned to be very careful about seeing calendars in every alignment. This is the discipline the field has had to build for itself. Given enough rocks, enough carvings, and enough moments of the sun and moon, striking coincidences will happen on their own. And the honest researcher has to ask whether a given alignment is precise, repeatable, and matched to a carving on purpose, or whether it is one lucky arrangement plucked from many. The summer solstice dagger passes that harder test about as well as any such claim in North America. The lunar markings ask us to trust a great deal more on far thinner evidence, and reasonable specialists have declined to go that far. Holding those two verdicts at once, confident about the sun and cautious about the moon, is not fence-sitting. It is simply what the evidence supports. And there is one more humbling fact. In the year 1989, researchers realized that the slabs had shifted slightly, probably as the soil they rested on eroded away, perhaps worsened by all the feet that had climbed up to see the famous site. The summer solstice dagger no longer falls quite as cleanly as it once did. The instrument, if it was an instrument, has already been thrown out of true within our own lifetimes, which is a sobering reminder of how fragile the whole arrangement always was. None of that, though, changes the deepest point. And here, the stones and the living people of the region meet. Because whatever the exact truth about the slabs and the moon, the Sun Dagger does not stand alone. It sits in a canyon full of buildings deliberately aligned to the sun and the moon, made by a people for whom watching the sky was clearly central, and it connects to a tradition of sky watching that is still alive today. The ancestral Puebloans of Chaco did not vanish. Their descendants are the Pueblo peoples of the Southwest, the Hopi, the Zuni, the people of Acoma, and the many Pueblo nations of the Rio Grande in New Mexico, along with others who hold ties to that ancestral world. And among the Pueblo peoples, watching the sun is not an ancient curiosity, but a living practice. In Pueblo communities, designated sun watchers have traditionally tracked the sunrise along the horizon, noting where it rises against the distant peaks and notches day by day, in order to set the calendar of ceremonies and to know when to plant. Among the Hopi, the winter solstice is marked by the great ceremony of soil, held when the sun reaches its southern limit and is coaxed to begin its journey back. And the timing of it has traditionally rested on a sun watcher reading the horizon. Among the Zuni, a sun priest carried a similar responsibility. watching the sunrise from a fixed spot to announce the solstice and the sacred calendar to the whole community. This is careful, disciplined, naked eye astronomy, kept as a sacred office and passed down through the generations. A sun priest reading the horizon to fix the turning of the year is doing, with the living landscape, exactly the kind of work the Sun Dagger seems built to do with stone and shadow. So the marking on Fajada Butte is not an isolated riddle. It is one expression, in rock, of a way of knowing the sky that runs from the builders of Chaco straight through to Pueblo people keeping the sun today. The obvious objection is worth meeting directly. Does the living Pueblo tradition prove exactly how the Sun Dagger was used 1,000 years ago? No, and we should not claim a perfect one-to-one match across so much time and so much history, including the upheavals the Pueblo world went through. But the continuity of skywatching as a central sacred practice among the descendants of Chaco is real and documented, and it makes the astronomical reading of the site not a stretch, but the natural expectation. And it is worth setting down clearly the noise that surrounds a place like this. Chaco attracts a great deal of speculation about lost wisdom and visitors from the stars, and none of that is needed or supported here. The people who watched the sky at Chaco were the ancestors of people who watch it still. None of the deepest questions here are fully closed, and the honest film leaves them open. We cannot be certain the slabs were placed by human hands, we cannot confirm the lunar claims, and we cannot ask the builders what the spiral meant to them. But we can separate the solid ground from the open questions. Here is what nobody seriously disputes. Near the top of Fajada Butte in Chaco Canyon, 3 stone slabs and a carved spiral produce a blade of light that bisects the spiral at the summer solstice, with related markings at the winter solstice and the equinoxes. The site was recognized by Anna Sofaer in 1977 and studied by her and the Solstice Project. It sits in a canyon whose great houses and roads show deep, deliberate attention to the sky, built by ancestral Puebloans between about 850 and 1150. And the Pueblo peoples, their descendants, keep a living tradition of watching the sun to set their calendar. Those are the solid stones. Here is where the questions begin. We do not know for certain whether the Chacans quarried and placed the slabs or found them fallen and carved to match. We do not know whether the long lunar cycle was truly tracked here, whether that pattern is one we have read into the shadows. And we can no longer even see the summer dagger as the builder set it, because the stones shifted in 1989 and the alignment slipped. Visit Chaco today and you cannot climb to the Sun Dagger at all. Fajada Butte has been closed to the public to protect the fragile site from the very attention that discovering it brought. So the spiral turns in the light now with almost no one watching, the way it did for the centuries before Sofaer climbed up. The great houses still stand in the canyon below, their walls and windows still lined up with the turning sun, and every summer the light still comes down between the slabs and falls across the carving, a little off from where it used to land, but keeping the appointment all the same. History is rarely settled by a single carving, and some of the most careful things ancient people made are the easiest for us to either dismiss or oversell. It is assembled slowly, one observation, one honest doubt, one living tradition at a time, and the wise course with a site like this is to hold the clear part firmly and the uncertain part lightly, and to remember whose ancestors did the watching. The Sun Dagger of Chaco sits in that space, the solstice real, the intention likely, the sky watching alive to this day. The spiral is carved. The light still falls. The Pueblo people still keep the sun. Thank you for climbing up to the light with me. If you would like more of these, the kind that weigh a wonder honestly instead of just selling it, consider subscribing, because that is exactly what the next one does. Until then, a question worth sitting with. When a blade of sunlight still splits a 1,000-year-old spiral on the longest day of the year, and the descendants of the people who carved it are still watching the same sun climb the same sky, does it matter whether we can prove every last alignment, or is the appointment itself the answer?